Well, thanks for having me on the show again.
I appreciate it. Now, the key question for me, and a lot of people are worried about all this spending, is whether these new programs are going to become entitlements or whether they will phase out. I don't know if you just heard the president's aide saying they're all expected to phase out. What do you say?
When was the last time you saw a federal program reduced or eliminated? I mean, that's the big question. And we've plussed up programs that are already in existence. And now we've got states, for example, that are going to get used to these new revenue numbers. And then all of a sudden, in a few years, we're going to say, oh, we're bringing on all that money back down. I think that was all of our concern about this stimulus package, is this was really an entitlement bill, and really very few things in this bill actually are going to stimulate the economy and create long-term jobs for the American people, which is what the American people, if you're going to borrow all this money, they want a dividend out of that, and the dividend has to be that we have to create jobs in this country.
Now, they've only put out 6% of the total so far. I say only, that's still billions and billions of dollars, but most of that has been spent on Medicaid and Medicare, helping the states handle these unfunded mandates that they got to deal with Medicaid and Medicare. Presumably, that's something that could be phased out, correct?
Well, it could be, but the problem is are we stimulating the economy, or are we just bringing bailout money for some of the states? I understand the problems that many of these states are having with Medicare and Medicaid. The program is very prescriptive. It obviously needs reform, but if the intent of going and borrowing $1 trillion was to stimulate the economy, create jobs, help small businesses all across the country begin to rebuild themselves, how does Medicaid and Medicare fit into that equation?
And plus, it's not only the spending of money. Whenever you have spending of a lot of money, you also have a certain amount of increase in power by the federal government. And already we've seen some power plays in terms of how they're dealing with California. I mentioned that to our last guest.
Yes.
They're kind of holding $7 billion of Medicare funding over the head of Californians unless they do what their friends in the unions want them to do. So there are these power plays going on now.
And that's a total abuse of the program. I mean, if the goal here, obviously I voted against the stimulus package, but if you're going to have a stimulus package, one, we owe the American people good use of that money. And $1 million runways in a small community that has very little air traffic doesn't bring a lot of confidence to the American people. And then using power plays of saying, if you don't play with our friends in the union, then we're not going to give you the money. Again, I think it's an egregious use of the money. And I think it's beginning to materialize the fears that a lot of members like myself had about how this program is going to be implemented.
And again, you're getting the government picking winners and losers, and we saw that happen with a lot of the bailout money as well, the TARP programs, and that's still going on. And again, that's the kind of power abuses that involves conflicts of interest, which our founders tried desperately to prevent.
Absolutely. I mean, they were trying to get away from that because the king was determining who the winners and losers were in this country. And now we've got the federal government determining who the winners and losers are, what kind of mortgages we're going to get, what kind of credit cards we can carry, even maybe now what kind of automobiles we're going to drive. I think it's a great concern of this massive big government movement that's happened just in a very short period of time.
Do you see any exit strategy? We got to exit this interview, but do you see any exit strategy from the government pulling out at all from what they've gotten into?
I've said that this is a marriage that's going to be very rough, but wait till you see the divorce. When you're getting the markets are trying to kind of figure out how to do business with this major government intervention, and then all of a sudden one day somebody's going to blow the whistle and say, okay, it's time for the government to leave the markets. It's going to be very disruptive. And so, and there again, then we'll have to rebuild the economy from this disruption of this divorce when we try to get the government out of it. And I'm not so optimistic in some of these areas we'll be able to get the government out of it.
Randy Neugebauer, Congressman from Texas, thank you very much. Good to see you again.
Thank you for having me on the program.
And we welcome our panel now, Fox News contributor